welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man thoroughly broken in by 4 years with me.
Tim Longo.
There you go.
Yeah, wow, that's a nice subtle plug for my other podcast.
Yeah. People are going to listen to that first, 2 minutes of your new podcast that you're doing with your wife and be like, I don't know, this is a little too... I don't know if this is for me.
It's a very specific thing with a husband and wife.
Yes.
Talking about a very random, not very random, but pretty niche, Northern Exposure. So for those who don't know, Voice of the Last Frontier is a podcast that I'm doing now with my wife during COVID. So
So you're learning what it is to produce every week.
New respect. Thank you for all of your years of hard work on producing. I can say years. It's been years.
It is. It's been a long time. It has in fact been almost it's like 4.5, I guess. 4 years and Anyway, best not thought about. So we're still playing Populous. I think we have now. We had spoken with somebody, actually a former guest, and it said I was kind of surprised you played Populous because it's a little thin. And I think that was. I mean, I've had that in the back of my mind since he said that, but also it is a little thin. I only played, I think, another 3 levels, one of them that took me a few attempts. I'm not particularly good at this game, I'll be honest. And so I end up spending a lot of time like relearning the strategy. Oh yeah, I got to remember to do that. I got to remember to do that. All the things that we talked about last time. But I do have a good sense of what I have some sense of what's going on under the hood that you didn't fully have. Although I don't always understand how the systems interact. I do at least know everything the game's trying to show me, I guess. I don't know. There's both a lot going on, but it's so little of it is directly surfaced to you in a very readable way that it's hard to know much is going on. And it's also very hard to know what to do with that information.
Yeah. You should elaborate on that point you're just talking about. But when you do, like, how was it in the manual that you found out about the food stuff, or how did you ascertain what was going on with this the texturing that happens around buildings?
Now I'm trying to remember if it was the manual. I feel like at some point I went and was reading, trying to find contemporary stuff about the game, and I might have picked it up from there. So it may not even be in the manual, which is kind of unforgivable. Or it might be just very obliquely referred to. Like, there's no screenshots or anything that would indicate to you the things that they would talk about. So if it's even in the manual,
how would you know?
You wouldn't really know. It would be very difficult to understand. So what we're kind of dancing around here is that there's, with the way the settlers, the worshipers work. Basically, they autonomously build buildings. Those buildings seem to take in a certain number of settlers and generate settlers based on how much food you have, which is a mechanic Tim didn't even know was there, right? That there's some kind of food number or something. And it's based on, like, each building type, as the buildings get bigger, controls a certain amount of land, and it changes the what we would call a texture today, but it's basically a rendering style on that flat land around it to make it kind of a very even dither. It's just alternating pixels or every third or fourth pixel or something like that, but it's a very regular pattern. And that's meant to indicate that that's farmland. And farmland generates food, and my understanding is that there's some relationship between food and settlers that leads to more settlers. So I don't have an equation by any means. It sort of feels like SimCity in that way. Like,
maybe
the original SimCity was you were supposed to get a feel for those systems And ultimately, people figured out the formulas, or they were in strategy guides and things like that, but they weren't surfaced directly in the game in any way. So you just kind of had to get the feeling like I keep building roads, and that just means more traffic. And that was supposed to be like an aha moment. And something similar is going on here, where it's like I kept building buildings until they unified into a castle, and then I didn't have any more settlers. Which might also be an aha moment, but it's like a less efficient use of the land, I think, at that point, and you don't generate enough. If all you have is castles, I mean, that was one of the things that happened is I had, and this might be where I kind of hooked onto this, was like, all I have is castles early in the game, and I don't have enough population to do it. Maybe I just only had 2 population or something. I don't even know how any of that works, but I don't know. All of that is very opaque.
Well, and the other challenge there is that the way that they message success in the scoreboard at the end, they list population, but they also list castles separately. So it gives, at least for me, it gave me the impression that castles were very important for success. You know what I mean? And we both of us in pre-show were talking about a sort of theory early game. It only seems to be an issue early game, because once you get to mid and late game, like focusing on castles seems to be the right, at least for me, that ended up working really well. And I don't know if I can call myself good at the game, but I've only lost once. I've only had to restart a level once. So I think I just found a formula that just works every time. You know what I mean? And I just kind of happened into it. But I don't think I could explain exactly why it works. I just sort of like pinball wizard my way through this thing or something. But yeah, so I mean, it sends some signals, where I was like, okay, I want a castle as quickly as possible, because that's, of course I want a castle. But then something happens early game if you have a castle, because you can get a castle fairly quickly if you're
if you're
raising
flattening out enough land,
the right places, but then they seem to kind of hunker down in the castle, and no one's leaving to settle more land. And so I think both of us independently decided we would try destroying the castle to force them to leave and create new houses to kind of dislodge them. And then I would usually rebuild the castle after that, and it would be fine. But I don't know if it was an AI bug or just sort of like, but like you said, I guess it could be a realization that I just didn't have about how
it might be an unintended dynamic. Yeah, I don't like.
But the thing,
just like you can build to it really fast, but yeah, they are reinforcing that. I don't.
Well, not only that, but the more if you do what they say you're supposed to do, and that is flatten land, because it's indirect control, you can't stop them from making castles. So if you make a big flat area, they're gonna make castles will
like
happen. That's just what they're gonna do. And so you kind of have to subvert the dynamic there if you want specific things to happen, which is a very weird feeling for a game where you're supposed, I mean, I don't know, it feels like you're unoptimizing to trick the game into having direct control.
To prod them into doing what
I want direct control. So I'm going to find, like, it's just such a
it's like having an ant farm, and like, you know what, if you guys are spending too much time over in this section and dropping like a bunch of water there, like, well, you're not going to come here anymore,
right. Yeah. Well, that's wow. Is that something that you did as a child, or
it's not, but it's something that I'm now thinking about doing as an adult. I didn't have an ant farm as a child, but I always wanted to, and now I'm like, oh, maybe.
Oh no, ants in your house during COVID.
Weird. This is a weird Amazon order. Ant farm and some kind of acid. Very strange.
Oh no. What have we done? God game has become real life.
Glass. Anyway.
It's such a funny dynamic to have. I just don't play a lot of indirect control games, to be honest. I think that's part of the problem. Well,
we played GTA, and that's how it drives. Zing!
Oh, wow. Oh, I didn't expect that one to be coming out of nowhere. But even
No,
like
yeah,
even strategy games, I mean, we know for those who listen that I fell down some civ holes there for a time.
and you can go as far as you want.
Yeah, but there's
Micromanaging
still
that.
you can be super meticulous and OCD about it. And then when it comes to strategy games, like RTSs are my preferred. And so, I'm just not, and that's, that's like, there is some, there's some AI going on there, but you really are controlling everything as you go. And so I just am not used to that dynamic. I think I've obviously played the Dungeon Keepers in the past and stuff, but it's just the zeitgeist of the time. It's not like it's my favorite genre. So it's just such an awkward feeling for me personally to have, they give you some direct control over certain things, but not things I'm used to. And so because they give you some control, you are going to manipulate as a player the world based on what control you have. And so, okay, I can raise and lower land, so I'm going to try to ant farm my way through this, and like, oh no, you're going to do what I want. And so I'm going to destroy my own castle because I want you to leave the castle. And
I did find if you had a leader and you put yourself into settle mode, that leader tended to go and like build buildings like crazy. And that might be part of it too, is like that there's just some subtle interactions that you're supposed to sort of discover over time. It felt like like I said, I just don't.
It could be. Yeah. I didn't find that. I thought that would be the case with the leader, but there were times when I had a leader early game and a castle, and he was in the castle and he would not leave the castle.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I even had a whole
once they're in a castle, I think that's a problem. Yeah. I don't think any of them like to leave castles.
And I think there's some combining thing, right, happening there too. Like they're combining with the building or later they combine with each other and stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It's just such a fascinating, yes, I probably should have really read the manual cover to cover in every detail. I skimmed some sections but I read some sections more thoroughly. And so I'm sure I missed some critical things that somebody who's a Populous expert might be yelling at me for. But I do kind of like trying, for the podcast at least, trying to dissect what the heck's going on and seeing. Yeah. And kind of testing the systems out a little bit, and like you said, it's pretty shallow, so there's not much to do there. But yeah, once I found a pretty good strategy, I just stuck with that, and it seemed to work pretty well. Yeah. So I mean, one story that I'll so one problem that I ended up having because sometimes I just get impatient and I'm clicking too much. The clicking. The night button is right next to the earthquake button. And so there was often times, and I don't know if it's the case, but I feel like multiple clicks kick them into gear a little bit more when it comes to like, you want them to go to the holy symbol or something. And it's just my impatience. I'm sure it didn't really do this.
Yeah. You're the sort of person who pushes the elevator button.
It's coming. A couple more times.
The light's already on.
A couple more times. Yeah. Nope. If I click it again. So anyway, because of that, I would accidentally earthquake myself quite a bit when I'm trying to make knights, which is exactly the phase of the game when you don't want to be doing that because you're probably about to go try attack.
Yeah, and you start to lose a lot of mana too because apparently the settlers don't like when you do miracles and it hurts them. That you lose mana, I think, pretty quickly when you do that. So it's not just the cost, but it's also there's like a generation cost or something like that where they're like, do we really want to worship this god when he treats us so bad?
So I'm
kind of curious how the ants are going to do with that. Yeah, so it ends up costing you in a lot of ways, I think.
Oh yeah. Hopefully the ants will revolt and escape and infest your house as with revenge. But the other thing, so I one of the main strategies that I ended up focusing most of my games on was flooding. And if there's the predetermined rules for each game, for each level, so obviously sometimes you can't flood, but especially if for whatever reason, a lot of the maps that I played would allow me to do flood, but not the enemy.
Oh wow!
And
I don't
so,
think I even noticed that, but yeah, as a thing, like,
so
I
the
probably should have been doing more of that. I didn't realize that was the case. I had done it once, and I was like, I wasn't super happy with the results, so I haven't really experimented with it more.
I think, to be honest, I think it's the God game nature of it that I really liked doing it because it felt so powerful. It felt
It does,
so cool to do it. And so, I think, so I don't know what you call it, the start screen or like the setup screen where it shows you the name of the level, right? It gives you the mutators essentially for what that level. And so that's where it shows you like who does what. And so, oftentimes they wouldn't have the ability to flood. So because I knew that, obviously I would take advantage of it. And so I would always build up to a certain level and then, basically hold them off for a while and then mid to late game flood. And then, as you, I think, talked about last week, when you flood them out so effectively like that, the AI rebounds very quickly.
Yeah.
And instantly, I did it so many times I could really watch what happens. But as soon as you flood them, instantly a bunch of small islands pop up. So you don't, even though technically I think it would really wipe them out and kill them all, they don't allow it essentially. So it's still effective, and you basically get probably 80% of them are gone, so it's still the right strategy, but still it's so funny to see how fast, like literally instantaneously, these little islands pop up with guys.
Oh yeah. Like, he flooded, bling, boom, little islets everywhere. And you're like, what? Wait, what?
Yeah. So you still very effective and still fun to do. But one time it was on a lava level and I had, so the swamp button and the flood button are very similar looking.
They are. Mm-hmm.
And this was early in my flooding strategy phase, so I wasn't quite like remembering which button was which. And so I was all set up and I hit that. And it was sort of mid game and I wanted to fool with swamp and I hit that swamp button, but it wasn't the swamp button. It was the flood button and it was a lava level. And so I basically wiped myself out with them and almost my whole civilization, but my holy symbol was in the middle of the lava.
Oh no.
So it was basically like that was a restart, of my own making. But yeah, so I wanted to ask you from like, another thing that kind of kept happening to me was sort of, I felt like every game hit this rhythm of turning, like there was always like a moment where the tides turned. Every early game, I felt like I was always behind civilization, like population wise.
Yeah.
He was always, the enemy was always growing more quickly. And I would assume that would be the case because AI is able to move more quickly and kind of cheat and do kind of, they're not.
They definitely raise land a lot faster. Like they flatten out a lot of space very quickly, and you're like, how are you doing that? And it's like, well, you just select your rectangle, select an whole area, and just do them all at once. And like, let's just add a bunch of land here, whereas we have to go one at a time.
Yeah, it's very cumbersome. Yeah, and I mean, I think as an aside, I think this game is good for OCD people. It's such a, it's click, so click, like
1 1 1 1 1 1
yeah, and flattening everything out. It's like it just feels like you're really
cleaning up those trees and mountains. Like, let me just lower this. I got to get this out of here. So it's breaking everything up.
Yeah, and that's a whole layer that I actually didn't get to. You mentioned that in pre-show too, and it didn't even occur to me that I could actually get rid of trees. By doing that. I guess I just thought they were always there, but now I'm even more OCD that I want to go back and really clean out. But the cool thing about the turning and tide is what I was talking about, is that if I stuck with it, and basically just kind of like held them off during that phase, because occasionally they would send, depending on the map, the leader would come over and do some damage, and they would send a few others over. They tend to be a little bit aggressive. It depends on the map, of course, because they have settings for how the AI is going to act or behave. But if I stuck it out, there would always be this turning point where, you know, the populations, I would then overcome them. And then once I got that to that point, there was no way they were going to beat me at that point. And did you experience sort of that, or were you kind of always, when you were winning, you were always kind of in the lead? And I wasn't sure why that was happening.
Yeah, I definitely found that there were some cases where I had built castles too early, and found myself like, oh, I'm really behind and I need to just spread out quickly, build, land, and, you know, try to get the leader going off in a direction and just making settlement after settlement. So I could sort of feel like I was behind in trying to catch up, and those would be the times where I would go and try to slow them down, specifically with earthquakes and swampland.
Yeah.
Because I'd be like, well, I'm way behind. I got to go do some bad things to them, which often felt like it led to retaliation. Like, I don't know if it's a tit-for-tat sort of AI, which is like, we'll leave you alone as long as we can. You know, but if you mess with us, we're going to mess with you.
Right.
That's the tit-for-tat strategy. So I'm not really sure. Like, I would have had to take much more detailed notes of, like, you know, this happened or that happened. I often just felt kind of overwhelmed. Like, I felt like there was, for me, the tipping point was really, really steep in either direction. Once I was ahead a little, the game was over. I mean, it was over, but for the crying. And once I was a little bit behind, and that peak seemed very narrow for me. Like, I'm behind a little bit and they're attacking, like, I might as well just start over. Like, because I did not find I could come back. But that might be partly my experience from the early game, where that just happened to me a lot. There was one level in particular where I finally figured out a general strategy that was working for me, in terms of, like, grabbing up more land lower instead of very high land, which is what I had been doing before that. And after that, I guess things were okay, but I don't know. I do feel like it's a coin flip whether or not I'll finish this time, because I'm just like, I could go either way. And once it starts going either way, it's just going that way. And the game is, you know, over. So, and it's whether I'm playing it out. So it's been very baffling from that standpoint. I feel almost no control, even though I feel like I understand a lot of what's going on. I don't feel like I know what to do about any of it. So,
yeah, because there's no like quick reaction other than like building a volcano or something. There's not a lot of quick reaction stuff you can do to react to a problem like that. And that's kind of why I was asking. And I kind of figured that that's what you'd say about sort of the tipping point question, because at one point I thought to myself, well, I'm going to ride this out and see. Cause almost every level, I feel like I would get to that sort of negative tipping point of feeling behind. But what I would do if I stuck with it is, essentially over time, slowly encroach, and creep up on them and then overtake them population. I don't know why, but I used the population bars as kind of an indication of how well I was doing, because I assumed it would sort of ultimately relate to how many.
I mean, that's probably a good idea. Win. It's not a thing I was doing, and like, I keep forgetting they're there because they're off in the corner, and I just totally forget that that's a thing.
Right.
What I would find often is what would happen would be I would start losing a lot of buildings on the sort of fringes of where I was, and then they just like pushed in, in a real wedge, and I just had a really hard time coming back from it. So, I stuck it out for a long time, a lot of times, and would, play an hour and be like, okay, well, I don't, I'm not dead. I haven't lost, but I'm not, like, I don't know how I come back, and how my papal magnets over there, like, how am I ever going to even get a leader so I can do anything? And it just, all of that felt that way.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Especially, if you can't get your leader back. It's just, I don't know. It was interesting to see. I only bring it up because it was interesting for me. I was making that same assumption, but then once I kind of changed my mentality to stick with it and feel like, if I just kind of like hunkered down in a way, and just kept building and kept trying to, and flattening, essentially flattening. And obviously I'm also trying to get to my flood moment as
your
well.
flood conditions.
Yeah, and so it was, I don't know, it was just an interesting sort of curve, because that early to sort of mid game, when you do feel overwhelmed and you do have less population than they do, there is that gut feeling where you're like, should I just start over? But then if I stuck with it, and then, yeah, that's you mentioned the other strategy that I realized I wasn't using enough is, managing your mana becomes a cooler thing than I thought it was going to, because there are a few different, obviously you can use, you can make knights or what have you. But peppering them with disasters to just slow them down ended up being more critical than I thought it would be. Because I guess obviously then they would need to spend mana to rebuild or what have you. So if you kind of are balancing those two things in the mid game, it seems to really give you the sort of tipping point that you need to overcome that. And then once you get that, then then it's just X amount to till flood.
It's got a similar feeling to me in some ways to another sort of land based game, which is Dominion, the card game. I know you haven't played a ton of that.
Yeah, I think I've only played a couple times.
Where it's sort of like I've played a lot of games of Dominion. There was a game that I played with my kids all the time, especially with my younger son. And there comes a point in every game where it's like you want to be the first person to buy the most expensive land type. But you want to do it as late as you can. So you want to be the first one to buy one, but as late as you can put it off, and there's just there's this push me, pull you kind of like, I definitely want to be like, I want to be able to it's like in the console wars. I want to announce second what my price is. Right. That's kind of topical at the moment. I want to be the last one to announce, but I want to know exactly what I can play with there, like so that I can react really quickly when it happens. So I want to kind of be ready at any time to do it. And that's how this game felt a lot of the times. Like, well, I want to hold off to really messing with them as long as I can, because I think that's going to provoke them into coming after me. But when I'm ready, I want to go. Like, I want to hit them a bunch of times right at once. I would often go to like where all their castles were, put as many castles on the screen as I could at once, usually like 4. Hit it with an earthquake and be like, okay, good. That's all just demolished. Now let me find another area like that and hit that with a swamp, and just like rain down as many different things I could at once to turn the tide. So no, it's completely true. And even to the degree where land bridges that they were building, were something occasionally that I would try to maintain because I didn't want them to get to my continent yet. You know what I mean? So I would actually try to, and it's hilarious to try to beat the raise low, raise low, raise.
So it's ultimately a losing proposition, so it's not really effective. But there were times when I was trying to prevent them from getting over when I didn't want.
Oh, I would do it with their buildings at times when they would be encroaching in. I'd be like, digging out from under the land. They'd make another one. I'd dig out over there. They'd raise a spot. I mean, it just was like fighting at the edges, fighting at the margins to try to prevent, drift. And giving up much stuff. And I never really, I think that's the frustrating thing is I don't feel like I learned anything in any of that. Like, I don't know what the right strategy is. You found one that works for you. And I feel like I'm like, I don't, sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. Like, I don't know, maybe I just needed to take better notes or be, I don't even know. Like, I really don't know what to have done to get better at it other than just play a bunch more but poured a lot of time into this game, so
well, and that's the thing is the problem is I don't think I could explain to you why my strategy works, you know what I mean? I don't know if pinball wizarding is a term that works there or not, but
in this game it helps to have that supple wrist, so that disembodied hand.
Just listening to the Who last night, so it was on my mind. But often I think in games when I don't when I don't have the wherewithal to really super dissect everything, or the time or the energy or something to really figure out what's going on. Once, I'm sure everybody does this, but once you do find a pattern, that you can repeat that works, then you're just going to do it. And I don't know, who knows, in a few more, if I were to keep playing in a few more levels, maybe that pattern would stop working. And I would have to find a new one. As a segue, the other small topic that I wanted to hit that I was surprised about as I started getting deeper into the levels is the start screen, where it does tell you the sort of rule set for that particular level, basically how hard the enemy is going to be from an AI perspective. Like, it has how slow they're going to build, how their rating, I think it's something like their rating.
Their difficulty rating or something
good,
like that.
Yeah, good, bad, excellent, or something like that. But then at the bottom, it has the sort of mutators, what I would call mutators, and that's sort of what are the things that the two civilizations can actually do, and that's like, everything, like all the verbs basically are yes or no answers. And so what I didn't anticipate is that in that screen, basically you're already strategizing, because for me at least, I'm looking at what he can and can't do, and so then I would shift. Like, there was a level where neither of us had could make knights, and so then I was thinking to myself, okay, so what is that going to mean? So it was kind of neat, because I'm already thinking, it's sort of like a loadout, right, in a shooter or something, where you're going and you're like, okay, what loadout am I going to take in with me, like Thief or something. And so similar to that feeling, which I just had no idea. So it's like, okay, or flooding being the example I already gave, is, if they can't flood and I can flood, then that's definitely my strategy, If it's vice versa, then I would have to plan for being flooded, in the way that I build. And so looking at that screen actually became more important to me, at least, than I would have thought.
Yeah, and that might be part of my problem, is that I didn't even realize we weren't always equal in terms of like.
Right.
So like, if I had known that they couldn't flood, that definitely would have told me something, and I definitely did not notice that. I did not really spend a lot of time looking at those level screens. I could go back and look at all of the individual ones because I have all the names. So it'd be easy enough to start them and look and see what the mutators, as it were. So yeah, I guess maybe I should do that just out of curiosity at this point. That may be a big part, is like, I didn't have the right mindset even going in, because I just was like, oh, type in the name and go, because I'm like, get to the game. But
it doesn't present them to you, right? It doesn't. Yeah, there's no indication that you need to care.
It's a very limited font selection and things like that in 1989. So not a lot of pixels for words.
I can't imagine anyone is playing along with us this time. This is such a retro. Like we as we already stated, I think we went back too far in this case. But I guess silver lining for me is I still had some interesting. I don't even want to say revelations, but some interesting conclusions that I just did not anticipate coming from the game, because I just didn't know it that well. And so there's more here from a legacy perspective of like impact on the industry than I would have anticipated. And I think I said this last time, but the kernel of what's happening here, you can totally see, just to reinforce what I said last week, but you can totally see the gold, and why it was so influential on other games, and just created a genre. It's always fun to play genre creator games, genre creating games.
It's got a great, what we would call in like product development, it's got a great unique selling proposition in that, and that's an advertising or marketing term as well. Like, this one aims big, right? It's, a lot of games are pretty direct, like you get to drive a race car or whatever. This one's really big, like you're a god. That's not nothing, right? I mean, I think that was a big selling point as well, because I think, in the late 80s, you're talking about some sort of, at that point, game styles that were getting pretty long in the tooth. We were getting to be about the time where adventure games were about to die for the first or second time. I'm not sure which. And there were certain types of strategy games, I think, that were more of the war game style. So it was like your units and my units, and more direct. Sort of stuff that was based on like old fashioned wargaming, table wargaming, which has always been a thing with computers because it speeds up all the calculations and table lookups and all those things in theory. Stuff like that. You had your role playing games, which were kind of wearing a groove into what their models were, and we played a number of those. Some from the Renaissance, but those are all based on the same things. So you had kind of like a lot of channels that had kind of been driven in. And they were, it's another one of those, right? I mean, there's so many games at the time, I think you could just say, like I had mentioned, I think in the first episode, we had a, Ultima 6 or 7 or whatever that I was playing at this time, maybe 5. But I mean, that's a lot of series were like at that point. Like, we're in the, we've had the third, Heroes of Might and Magic. We've had the whatevers, we've had spin-offs of series that were like, well, what if we took this sci-fi thing and made it magic instead, or, whatever. And you had a lot of that, where you had the Gold Box games, which maybe started a few years before this, and went a little longer. Can't exactly remember, but it's kind of in that area. So they weren't necessarily in a series by name, but they were clearly in a series. So, I mean, just had a lot of that going on. And then someone comes in, you're going to be able to flood all of the land. And you're like, that's different. That is not a thing I've seen before. And I think that is why it broke out when it did. I think, Dave Perry from Shiny used to talk at GDC about, like, you have to have the one sentence thing that your game can do that no other game can do. Like you can shoot a guy's eye out from a mile away was his MDK, sniper pitch. A mile away, you'll be able to shoot a guy's eye out. And I was like, yeah, I haven't done that before. That's true, or whatever. You're going to be, this giant or whatever, and et cetera. I can't think of other Shiny games at the moment, but like those were the sorts of things he was going after. And that's what Molyneux did too, right? You're a god, you're playing the guy who built the dungeon, right? Oh yeah, I haven't played the RPG where I built the dungeon, in a game before, et cetera. Or I'm the crime wave in Syndicate. More of those would come later, but that was kind of the thing there, I guess. I don't think I ever played Syndicate, but I think that's been a strength of his.
I don't know if they
streaming big.
So. Yeah, and I don't know if they still use it, but EA would call that the X statement too, right? That was one of the other terms. It's like, what is that statement that you describe the game in a very, very small manner with? Yeah. And I agreed. And I think that's I'm sure that's part of Molyneux, specifically his secret, or his superpower is when pitching a game or talking to a publisher about a new game, or all through his career, right? Like, he's there pontificating about this concept, and wowing people in the possibilities of things, and he, to be fair, he has gotten some criticism over the fulfillment of that promise not always being what he had sold. But I would say that there's way more successes than failures there anyway. So
sure. Yeah.
The
I think it comes from a good place too, in that I think it's genuinely he gets carried away. Like he's so enthusiastic that he just is like, and would be able to do this. Like, that's what you're like when you're a kid thinking about a game. Like, it's a World War II game, but I'm also going to jump in. I'm going to fly the plane, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to bomb like this whole other continent. Like, and then we're going to go to space. Like, and it's just like you just go, right, as a kid. And I feel like that's what happens with him. Is that he's like, okay, you're a god, and then he just like it all just comes out. Like everything. And as soon as he starts going, he just doesn't stop. And he doesn't know where to stop because it's just his. Like, oh yeah, and he's more like brainstorming on the fly. These are the things we should try, and I think I've heard that, in postmortems and things like that, is that helps people. I mean, that has helped other games as well of like, well, we delivered a video. BioShock is a a well-known example of a game that didn't really have any of that stuff in it. It didn't have bees coming out of your arms when that video came out, but they just put it in the video, and it's like, well, I guess that's our game now. Like, I guess we're figuring out how to make things that are that kind of cool,
Right.
to put in our game now. So,
Right. Yeah, and I think the other important part of that maybe is context for what a Molyneux, the importance of a Molyneux in the industry, or any industry really, or any medium, is you know, he's, I don't want to give him too much credit for being sort of, because there's lots of trailblazers, but you need those people who are going beyond their means when it comes to concepts to push the industry forward. And that's a challenging thing to do. But like you said, he does get carried away, but I think there's also some value in going beyond the limits of what is possible, because that's what moves the medium forward. And, you know, different luminaries do it in different ways, you know, like a Miyamoto or something, you know, doesn't really talk about it ahead of time. He just does it, you know what I mean?
right.
And does it in a, you know, and so there's value in both, but you know, somewhere behind the scenes, he did what Molyneux does publicly, but to his team probably, right? And then they're wowed by it, and they're like, okay, yeah, we can make a game where I'm following a bunch of little Pikmin around, and I get to pick them up and throw them, you know. So it's like taking, you know, a genre merging thing like Pikmin, and like, how does that start, and how did that come up? Oh, and he actually publicly later talked about some of his inspiration for that game, but you don't really hear that until it's shipped. So it's interesting approaches to.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he does publicly what Roberta Williams described her process. You know, she didn't keep up with technology and things like that. She didn't want to be held back by her preconceptions of what the computers could do, right? Yeah. And I remember at the time, we probably talked about this in the Space Quest, King's Quest episodes. I remember at the time thinking that was foolish, and it was only when I grew more as a developer when I thought, actually, no, that's pretty wise. Like, it's very easy, the longer you're in it, to go into those channels, to go into those grooves, right? Of like, oh, I know how to do this thing, right? You know, or I know that this can be done. And it's, you know, I think it's valuable to have, regardless of whether they're public facing, I think it's valuable to have the people who are pushing I don't know, why did we never do this thing before? You know, let's just do this thing. Like, I think there's a lot to be seen there. So,
yeah. And it can be, and you can push on any platform, right? And with any technology there, it can be pushed. Mobile can be pushed, whatever, you know, like there can be a crazy Miyamoto or Williams or Molyneux idea that, like she said, that, you know, that doesn't, that's why I you know, maybe playing a little bit of my hand here, but new console generations aren't as interesting to me as they used to be, because any generation, like we could launch
new PCs aren't as interesting to me. Yes,
we could launch a PS2 game. You know, I'm not saying we could because we're badasses or anything, but I'm just saying, like, somebody could launch a PS2 game with something crazy that no one's seen before on the PS2, and it still could be amazing, right? It doesn't have to be the PS5. So I don't know. It's just, technology moving forward isn't always the way that you innovate and create new experiences, like Molyneux is trying to always seems to do, and has done with this game.
Yeah, I think we're at a point where we need to be more thoughtful about picking our constraints, you know, and some of that is, you know, sort of vision constraints. You know, we're not about this, we're not about that. I think that's actually, you know, and now we're way afield. But you know, one of the criticisms I would have for the, you know, the sort of Ubisoft model would be they've worn a bunch of grooves that they just, you know, that's every record, you know, that they make is the same grooves, right? It's just like, oh, we have these things that we do. And they're not sort of thinking like, well, is that the most appropriate thing for this game? Or they're just adapting whatever game there is to that kind of style. And it's just a house style, and they all have that. And or at least all the big ones. And I mean, maybe that's less true of some of the, I know there's some smaller games, there's that one that they had to rename recently or whatever, that maybe are going to do something different a little bit. And that,
Immortals.
That'd be, Immortals, right? Immortals,
which Phoenix Rising is the new name.
Uninspired Rising. Yeah, I got it.
Phoenix with a Y, because they probably would have gotten sued by Gears of War if they'd used an I, and who knows?
Oh my goodness! Right,
yeah.
I didn't even.
But did you, as an aside, did you hear why they had to change the name? That came out today.
I did. Monster Energy, apparently.
Monster sued them. Oh boy! Yeah,
and they're like, you know what? This is not worth fighting over.
Yeah,
because you can't name something gods and monsters. Wow, that's a thing.
At the same time, yeah. No, I mean, I think you put it well as far as the groove goes. And I think that, I mean, Ubisoft's an interesting example because they probably have a sort of risk tolerance that is at a certain point, right, with the size of the teams they have and the number of products they have to have every year, and so they lean into those grooves to some degree. And I would imagine, not having worked at a company like that specifically, at Ubisoft, I would imagine changing groove is very difficult internally, right, to pitch a new game, etc., because of the risk tolerance. But I don't think that's a Peter Molyneux. I don't think he would think about that, right? And I'm sure that executives that he would work for, that during his career, would be frustrated by that, because he, it's like, well, yeah, we could do your wacky, crazy new idea that's not like anything else, but that's going to be pretty hard, and the possibility of failure is high, or what have you, and so you have to respect. I mean, I think it's telling that Ubisoft, as an example, doesn't necessarily have too many luminaries that you look to, other than maybe Michel Ancel, who's technically independent now,
right?
So it's
but of course, I mean, how long since we first heard inklings of what he's working on now, right? I mean, it's been ages, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the cost. I mean, that was the other thing I was going to say, is that to some degree, I also look at Molyneux's career and I think, well, sure, awesome. I mean, amazing career anybody would be proud of. And most of his best work happened in sort of this one decade where it was really relatively cheap to make games. So they could be made quickly, because the polish levels couldn't be what they would have to be today, right? So, like, literally, the mini map here is pixels, right? I mean, this is about as simple as it could possibly be, and it's only the only things that actually update on the screen are, like we said last time or the time before, only like 30% of the screen. I mean, there's and that was hard to do. But I mean, it forces you into like this very limited space. This game probably took, 8 months or whatever, and you can pump out a lot of ideas, and not everyone's a winner. You can dream big because you're also like, well, if it fails, I'll make another one, right? And it's not 4 years of people's lives, or 5 years, or 7 years, or whatever. So there's that too. I mean, I think it's just, because I'm not really I play a lot of those Ubisoft games. I'm not really bagging on them. It's more of a, like, it is a sort of financial place that we're in, that it's hard to imagine that. It's easy to be worn into the grooves, I guess. So
yeah. No, that's a fair point. I don't think he scaled, with the industry the way that he could have when it comes to modernizing. Molyneux, I'm talking about specifically.
No, I know, and I think it's hard to, right? I mean,
it is for anybody, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things with Miyamoto that's surprising, is that he has, his is decades long, and he's still inventing, but he's also got a different kind of model, and he's got the hardware behind him, right? In that he can be pushing to be like, let's build some new hardware that enables something different, and that's what they do, right? So there's like a whole another angle on that. And their machines have always been a little simpler from that regard. They have a lot of constraints, and they inspire some creativity. So
yeah. Well, that went some places. That was nice. A little aside. Well, we had, Populous got a little thin, so it was time to think big picture. Well, and I think Molyneux, not to over index on him, and we've talked about a lot of white dudes, by the way, in this freaking industry. But I think Molyneux pulls that out of it, right? Because he is a big picture kind of guy, and I think he's influenced the industry in a big picture way. So I think it's funny that we got off the Populous topic specifically, but I feel like it's appropriate when it comes to the creator for this particular game.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I don't disagree. And we've talked pre-show a lot about how this is a designer who it's like, well, we picked this one. There's a half dozen others that we could potentially still play for the podcast. We probably won't, just because we've got so many different things we'd like to play, and there's some, there's other genres we're probably left languishing, but yeah, I mean, it's as I said in the first cast, you could probably just do a Bullfrog, podcast for a year of just Bullfrog games. And so if somebody out there wants to make it, I'll probably listen to it. Just send me email. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back. We have some reviews or a review and some email, and we should get to that. And we'll catch you on the backside of that.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. Even though this is, in theory, the last episode of our main series here on Populous, we are going to push off our takeaways until next week, when we're going to do a little bonus play of the third and final and fully 3D and much more modern Populous, the beginning, and it'll give us an interesting point of comparison. I don't know. We'll play, some. I don't think we're going to go.
Yeah, we don't have to go deep.
Yeah, we don't have to go super deep, but I think we just need to see. Well, I think we both have some ideas of how you take this thing forward, and I'll be curious to see what Bullfrog actually did with it. It is, of course, long after Molyneux's involvement, because he would have been long gone by then. He left in, I think we said 95 or 96, and Populous, the beginning, I think, came out in 1999, so a full decade later, maybe late 1998. In any case, it'll certainly be interesting to sort of compare and contrast how that moved forward. So it's not a genre that's entirely dead, but it's not a big thriving genre with lots of titles in it. The most recent big one that I know of is From Dust, which was by Eric Chahi a few years back. Has a lot of similarities. But yeah, it's not a game style I see a lot of. I'm probably just ignorant of them, but that's the last one that I can sort of remember knowing about. Anyway.
Yeah, God games specifically, I guess. Autoplay, not autoplay, but indirect control simulations. I feel like there's still a handful of those around, but yeah, maybe God games specifically. I don't know. I think in the takeaways we should talk more. I will have a takeaway / I want to talk about sort of the indirect control side of it, because I think that might hold some of the reasoning behind the genre, not being able to break out in the same ways that other genres have. But yeah.
Yep. No, I think that's very sensible. Okay, I've got, so we're going to turn to feedback. I have a review. Thank you for that. And we appreciate every review. We like to read them all here on the cast. I got one I believe from Germany, reading the tea leaves on my newsreader. The subject is Amazing Podcast. And I had a name and it is gone. So I'll have to look for that while I read it. This podcast is great for everyone who's interested in how games are made. Likeable hosts make it easy to understand the thought behind various game design decisions, even for those who don't have English as their natural language, such as myself. I binge heard all episodes about games I was interested in. 35 episodes, over 40 hours of amazing discussions. So I guess that wasn't from this year, because this year we've been kind of... yes, this is from Yannick. Thank you very much, Yannick. Because this year when COVID first hit, we were well into the 2 hours per episode, but we've settled down. We're trying to get back closer to an hour. But yeah, thank you very much for that. I think it was from Germany. My apologies if I got that wrong. But I'm glad. That is a great way to approach the podcast. And when I approach a new podcast, I'm sometimes like, do I have to go to the beginning? Is that a thing? This has been going for 5 years. Is that a thing I want to do? And sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But I think it's great to grab things that you're particularly interested in. Pick one that you like, or interview. A person that we've found and been able to talk to is a good way to go. So, thank you for that.
Yes, that's awesome. Great. Should I go to the mail?
You should go to the mail sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. Okay.
Subject is Populous FOV from Moss Neotech. Hello, Moss. Thank you for writing in. I looked into buying Populous for this playthrough, but when I checked out some gameplay and saw just how much of the screen was dedicated to actually playing the game, hard pass, man. I'm reading verbatim. It might be like 40% of the screen for the actual gameplay. Interesting. Yeah. So yeah, this will be interesting to talk about a little bit. I think I remember you guys talking about this a bit in Ultima, but some of these old games not using their screen real estate efficiently is kind of mind blowing. Was this a big problem looking back at old games? I remember it being a problem, but I feel like this game really puts it out there. Could you comrades discuss why this ever would have happened? Yes, I realize resolution was a major problem and buttons needed to be way bigger 30 years ago, but what the F? What the heck? Well, what incarnation for cleanliness? I don't know what he's saying there. In this giant book, is this giant book doing what? Oh, I see. Sorry, I'm totally butchering his joke.
Yeah.
What incarnation is this giant book doing on screen? Yeah, same question. There must have been a better way to do this. As always, love the cast and love listening to both of you, Moss. So what do you got?
Yeah. So, right. We did kind of talk about this a little bit, but I hadn't done any research about certainly the Amiga or anything like that. I never had an Amiga or programmed on one, and this was an Amiga forward game. So yes, absolutely, there are performance reasons why you would do this. I think what this game is trying to do is lean into having lots of little computer people, LCPs as they used to call them, and actually having those simulations of those little people be fairly robust, unfortunately to the detriment of actually even understanding all of what's going on with them. I think that we've talked about that with, like, there's multiple bars next to them, and it's like, what does the bar? It depends what it means. Like what which is a thing I just don't even look in that corner at all. So obviously there's too much screen for me to even take in, but the way games were made in this time period, as far as rendering goes, very different from how we do it today. I mean, today it's very common that you just clear the screen. That's the first thing you do, because you're really drawing the whole screen over again anyway, because of the way things are ordered. Like you have your UI on top, and then you get all this 3D world or even 2D world behind it, and then whatever else, the backgrounds and skyboxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at the time, that's not how screens were rendered. At the time, you actually had a big chunk of memory that was just your screen. that was not obviously not on a separate card or chip or anything like that either. It was just part of your memory was what the screen looked like, and an interrupt would be sent to your program saying, "Hey, I'm going to grab that. I'm going to put that on the screen," and it would basically directly copy it to the to the TV, directly output it to the TV through a converter that might be like a hardware renderer, or like without getting into details of that, but a rasterizer it would be called. Basically, you just had a big long line of memory, which was these are the pixels. So they literally aren't having to change the pixels every frame. They're only having to do the ones that they're actually changing, which are in the actual little windows that show the state of the game. The buttons, they would change when you clicked on them. And it's also probably why the mouse is a little laggy, is that they're only doing that maybe on an interrupt. It's hard to actually know, and those interrupts are probably infrequent. So there's all these things that are going on that have to do with that. The Amiga was a TV based machine as well, so it would have been whatever. I think that's 24 frames per second in the UK and 30 here. So there's concerns of that as well that interact that would have made those things more complicated. But yeah, machines were just not fast, and this ran on the Atari ST and early DOS machines, as well as some consoles. So the consoles often had specialized hardware to make things you'd want to do on them faster, like sprite rendering. But in a buffer-based format like these various PCs of the time, you literally were just, the way you drew the sprite was you undrew it where it was and you drew it somewhere else. Maybe depends on the game. So I mean, John Romero could go on and on about these details, and would, believe me. I've heard him do it. You've heard him do it.
Yeah, we've all heard him do it.
We've all heard him do it. So yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it, is that they did not have the performance to render the screen to the degree that you would want, I guess, that we'll probably see in Populous at the beginning. And so they did what they could. I mean, I understand having an isometric view, because I think it's very hard to see the height differences if you're looking straight down. I think that's a much harder problem than looking at it kind of from an oblique angle. So having done that, if you start from there, you start to see where the rest of it comes from to some degree. I think the two windows thing with the minimap up over there, not great. But I at the same time, I see like, well, if you're doing this particular diagonal angle, then you probably also want that map to follow the same pattern, right? I mean, it's just it starts to look that way. So.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to, not that anyone would even have this, but it would be interesting to know what the prototype or early versions before the UI was added, the UI art was added, looked like. And why I mentioned that, to sort of Moss's question and what you just sort of wonderfully described and broke down, you can imagine them having the close-in view of the world window, right, as part of their prototype. And then I'm just going to randomly kind of talk about some things that probably didn't happen this way, but I'll give you a hypothetical. And then, they would move around that screen with the mouse or with keys, and then realize they need a quick way to jump around the world in a macro way. So they have a mini map. And so, the prototype didn't have any UI. It was just those two things. And then some sort of debuggy looking buttons at the bottom that allowed you to use the verbs that are in the game. Right.
Right. Which were probably just bound with keys originally. Yeah.
Yeah. Probably there may not have even been a UI. And then there probably was like a bar that was like a mana bar, or it could have even been a number. Might have not even been a bar. And that number just went up and down or something. And so okay, well, we have these two windows that are critical for moving around the world. And then we have these verbs that are buttons, or maybe we should make them buttons because they're keys. And then they're like, okay, so what's our theme? And then they're like, okay, now we need a book, and we need
Right.
this
A holy book, right?
a holy book, and that's when the Molyneux of the world come in and kind of overcomplicate things a little bit. But at the same time, all they're really doing, as Brett was just describing, is filling the negative space that the prototype already had. Like there's negative space on the screen that they can't use anyway. So they're like, well, we could just leave it negative and like not do anything with it, but why not just make something cool there? And then the other thing I want to push back on Moss on is he has a sentence here. It might be, quote, it might be like 40% of the screen for the actual gameplay. And I know his frustration. Believe me, I felt it when we started the game. But in this particular game's case, that isn't true. The gameplay actually fully encompasses the whole screen because everything that's there, other than the detail of like the book binding and stuff that, but like the buttons and the mini map and, you know, and yes, there's the rendering side of what Brett was just saying that was a necessity. But at the same time, I'm using most of the screen, 80% of the screen I'm using to play the game. And I think what he means is more of like in the real-time sense of the close-in view. But I think he makes a good point in that when you look at a screenshot or a video of the game, you are highly confused about how it all works, you know, and why it is the way it is. So it's kind of a fascinating problem.
I think it probably the prototype probably didn't even start with the isometric view. I bet the first prototype was a top-down view, and they're like, I don't know how to draw it to make it even parsable, like to know, right? I mean, I think there was a lot of problems that they had to solve, and there's and they're doing 3D on machines that really couldn't do 3D. I mean, I wrote a 3D renderer for my Apple II, which is not too far before this. I mean, it's far enough before this that it was a pretty big difference, but you know, that you were talking seconds per frame rather than the other way around. And that was to draw a wireframe, right? I mean, to draw a cube you could have spinning at something close to an interactive rate, but anything more complicated was, you know, slideshow time. You know, I calculated the Mandelbrot set once and did it, you know, in an image, and that I had to run it overnight on my Apple. That's what you're talking about back then. Like, in order to actually see something where every pixel was calculated to be as accurate as it could be, you had to wait. You know, I mean, that's how slow they were. So, I mean, it's a big problem.
Yeah, and that's also, I think, going.
I don't want to be working in these constraints. I want to be clear. I mean, this is too far back for me.
Right. Well, and I think the screenshot test in this case for Moss is a good example of, like, we were talking about the marketing side of this game and why it blew up, and the pitch is great. And I think once you get into it, you're kind of like, there's a revelatory moment of like, oh my gosh, I'm raising and lowering land multiple layers. Yeah. And it's reacting. So there's some of that stuff that's cool. But, you know, to be honest, I'm looking at the box cover right now and it's like, wow, that looks amazing. You know, and it's this, you know, it's this planet that is being held by a godly hand, you know, and you're like, wow, what is this thing? Exactly, and then like Moss, like what happened to Moss, he's looking at a video or a thing and it's like, wait a second, what the heck is this? So
yeah, we didn't used to advertise the games. We used to advertise the feeling of playing the games, and with pictures and things, not or art, right? And the box, the box covers, right? I mean, it was totally different thing.
I mean, the NES, right? NES covers are notorious. The notorious example of that, right? Like Mega Man or Zelda or something. You're like, yeah, of course, yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's a funny. God, it's such a funny.
Well, it's partly why. I mean, you really couldn't communicate what the game was about from a static screenshot. Because there just wasn't the resolution there. This would have been a CGA game, I guess, probably, which is what, I don't know, 480 by 320 maybe, or less, something like that. I don't actually know. I've certainly never shipped a CGA graphics game, so I don't actually know. But it's it's higher than 320 by 200, but it's not as high as 640. That would be VGA. So it's somewhere in there, like in the 400 to 480. You know, it's just, this is not a lot of pixels. That's why the buttons did have to be a lot bigger, because they're not any bigger. They're still only 16 or 20 pixels high. It's just that's a huge percentage of, that's 1/20th of the screen,
Right.
So. And
I still misclicked. So
you still accidentally, well, yeah, there's a readability problem there. But yeah, when you play this thing in a window, it's like a tiny corner of your screen, because it's like, if it's pixel to pixel, it's this postage stamp up in the corner, especially for you, fancy monitor.
It's super funny.
Yeah, it's got to be tiny on a 4K. I can't even imagine. I'm still running I can't even tell the difference anymore. So I still use kind of regular HD monitors, but people who use 4K monitors, I'm like, I wouldn't be able to tell, and I certainly wouldn't be able to see anything in this game. So,
no, it's the size of one of those small Post-its.
Yep.
When I go to window mode.
Oh my god. Anyway.
So yeah. Well, no, I mean, it was a good mail, Moss. Thanks for sending it. And I think
it is.
I think your reaction is appropriate, and I think it triggers a good discussion on a different time. Not only from Brett's point about constraints, but also just how games were perceived, and he mentioned Ultima, because we did talk about it with Ultima Underworld. And that was a similar, and I remember, because I played that game, because as I talked about on the series, obsessed, loved the game, like actually a fairly influential game on me as a developer and player. And I was playing that game live. Like, I got it when it came out, and yes, the rendering screen is, whatever, 40% of the screen, but I didn't care. I loved it. I loved it. It was like amazing to me, so, because I didn't know any better, I didn't know, which, go listen to that series if you want to hear us talk about that. But
yeah, for sure. Because that's one I didn't play. I mean, even the role-playing games of the time were often top down. On a PC, we couldn't scroll the screen horizontally. That was a thing that Romero talked about in his interview, to bring him up again. Yeah, I mean, just the constraint, and they figured out how to do it, but that they were the first to do it, and it wasn't even released. They didn't get to make it into a game, or they didn't, not right away. Their demo, they were like, oh my God, we got to go make a company and do this, because nobody had done it. So
right.
Anyway, the technical constraints definitely drove a lot of stuff, but yeah, there was specialized hardware basically to do that on other systems. I have the other email. This is from Jonathan. The subject is 5 stars and a question. Hi, Dev Game Club. I absolutely love your podcast. As a human born in the late 80s, pretty much everything you review tickles my lizard brain and unending fascination with the past. More seriously, I genuinely appreciate the thoughtful approach you bring to the games you discuss. From level design to politics, it's really wonderful stuff. My question isn't related to a specific game, but instead working in the video games industry. A bit of context. I'm 33 and have been working in tech for a few years now. I'm a creative director. I'm just going to put an asterisk next to that, because we mean something different by that than Jonathan here, I think, does. With a background in copywriting. I have a master's in English and dabbled in some game studies late in my degree from a theoretical standpoint: diegetics, hypothetical game design, cultural readings and criticism, etc. Tech is totally satisfactory, but I really find myself wanting to pivot to the games industry. My question is it still possible to pivot to the games industry mid-career in 2020? I love Mark Laidlaw's gaming industry origin tale, but feel that's a bit of a specific scenario to a specific time. Read the 1990s. I love the idea of video game writing as a gateway to creative direction in the industry, but sometimes feels like I'm a bit far along to make that switch. Would love to hear your thoughts and any anecdotes about colleagues you've worked with in the space who made mid-career pivots where video game writing can lead, and any advice on cracking into the space. Keep up the great work. Take care and stay safe. Same to you about all of that there, Jonathan. Thanks for the mail. Yeah, so this is somebody coming from something else into the more your end of things.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than mine, sometimes people ask about the tech end, and I'm like, well, maybe start making things. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to two things. One, because so Jonathan, is that his name?
Jonathan, yes.
Yeah, Jonathan he does have an asset in that he's had to, I'll say, creatively lead in some way based on the other industries he's been working in. And yeah, creative director as a term is used in various industries and is slightly different in each of them, including video games. So I think from an expectation standpoint, if Jonathan, and I say this to anyone I know who is trying to migrate, whether it's like from film, I've known some people who've come over from film or come over from like, I don't know, IT even, like somewhat tech related, but not on the creative side. And I think the expectation, which is probably an obvious answer, does have to change in that you have to be okay with not completely starting over, but you have to climb up the ladder a little bit to learn. If he wants to go into writing and design specifically, or writing or design, I think you have to kind of come in at a lower level than you are right now to migrate over there. So if you're okay with that, then going on to step two, and basically there's a bit of humble pie that has to come with that, right? Because you're used to probably leading a bunch of artists or graphic designers or something, or advertisers or what have you, or, copy folks. And so you'd then have to shift toward being led by somebody. But I think there's enough differences in both writing for games and designing for games from other industries that you kind of have to learn. It would be my suggestion to come in at a lower level and learn sort of some of the differences before trying to go straight over. I definitely don't think it's impossible. And then what Brett kind of alluded to, the second important thing these days, if you're not going to go, say, back to school or something like that, is to essentially make stuff. There's also, if you're specifically thinking about writing, there's actually a lot of very small indie projects that are out there, whether it's itch.io or things like that may be looking for writers. Maybe you do a few for free at first, or, very low, just to get some credit in writing in there and to get your sort of, your feet underneath you on what it means to write for games, because it isn't the same. And just build your portfolio up. And you can also just completely do that on your own as well, because the tools are way different than they've ever been. And really anyone can do it if you put the time into it. So getting demonstrability of your work, even if it's just you by yourself or with a few people, or finding some people online find an artist, find a programmer, and the three of you, make something. That's going to be super critical for any interview you're going to go to. But if you're willing to, take a couple steps back to enter into, like, another example I had, this isn't exactly the same, but because they were kind of in the industry already as a producer, but I had this producer who wanted to become a designer, and they were completely willing to go down to junior. They were essentially a lead producer. They were willing to go down to junior designer to make the shift, because they knew they couldn't go from lead producer to lead designer, right? You can't just migrate over, because it's just not that similar enough. And so you kind of have to learn a bit of a different version, slice of the trade. And so that's what he did.
You can't make a bridge from like two peaks in a mountain range, one to the other one. Maybe a little bit lower down. I mean, but the breaking point on the ropes from peak to peak is going to just be too much. It's just...
What great analogy. That sums it all up.
It's it's a Tim focused analogy, but it's definitely, you have to expect you're gonna have to walk downhill a ways and climb back up. And the walk down super easy, but the climb back up may take a little while.
Yeah, but is it possible? Totally is. And I think you definitely, and I've from those few folks that have migrated in from other industries that I've even hired. If you come in with leadership skills in a creative sense, like it seems like you have up to your career up to this point, speaking only for myself, I don't throw that stuff away. Like, that is still valuable, because as we've talked about on the podcast many times, managing creatives and being sort of leadership of creatives is a talent in and of itself. And so that is valuable, even if you have never made a game before. So definitely leverage that. But, and if you're writing specifically,
and that'll come out and help with the climb later, right? I mean, that you have the experience with the leadership will help once you have some of the skills. I mean, one of the things I've always heard about being a lead programmer is you have to have a certain amount of respect from the people that you lead, that you can also do the programming.
Right.
And that takes some experience.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that using the climb analogy is good because you're already conditioned in certain ways to be a leader or to manage or help mentor or what have you. So you can, when they're looking at who to promote or what have you, and you have that asset already there. But on the writing side specifically, like even if it's not, definitely samples are good. So, and even if you create your own concepts and write backstories, write some sample scripts and stuff and just get in there and have that available when that opportunity does come up and someone asks, to read your stuff, if that's where you want to go. So yeah, it's totally possible.
Yep. I would agree in any aspect. Yeah. You just got to be willing to make adjustments and, recalibrate your expectations. I think that would be true, going into anything different. I think at a certain point, especially the more specialized you get, the further up you get, the more you tend to be a little specialized on the industry you're in. So, All right. Well, that will do it. Thanks for both of those emails from Mas. Thanks, comrade, and from Jonathan. Good luck. You've had those at devgameclub@gmail.com. I love to throw that out multiple times so that people have a chance to hear it. And of course, we love to read every review. Thanks so much for that, Yannick. And again, if you put in a review, you don't hear me reading it, point me at it. I'm subscribed to Apple Podcasts reviews all over the place, but there are other platforms that I know nothing about. So just let me know where to find those things, or just email them in. You can find us on the web at www.devgameclub.com. Took us back there into the 90s with the whole www thing. Going a little retro with my link. And at Twitter at @devgameclub. Where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
As I've been mentioning, I have not been streaming for a while, so I'm just going to take that out for now. We'll see if I ever get back to that. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. Thanks so much for joining us, and good night.
Good night.